I want to remind everyone that all of us work really hard to keep our festival free for all, and so we are very grateful for every single donation that we do receive. We want to take this opportunity to actually thank our top, most generous donors, which is Richie Battle, Randy and Lisa Cohn, Ellen and Linwood Dame, Elizabeth Galvin, Adam and Ramona Nee, Nancy Seaman and Alan Schwartz, Beth Wilkinson and David Gregory, and our top sponsors, the White Elephant, which is the magnificent Jill Karp, and the Boston Globe, which is equally magnificent Linda Henry. So we want to thank all of our donors. So we are here today to welcome Liaquat Ahamed. Liaquat is a man who knows where the bodies are buried, financially speaking, of course. After a distinguished career in finance as an investment advisor, Liaquat brought the rare insider's knowledge to the page with devastating effect with his book, Lords of Finance, The Bankers Who Broke the World, which won the Pulitzer Prize and established him as one of the most compelling voices at the intersection of history and high finance. Now he returns with his just released second book, 1873, The Rothschilds, the First Great Depression and the Making of the Modern World, named the most anticipated book of 2026 by Literary Hub. In it, Liaquat takes us back to the first truly global financial crisis, a catastrophe whose fault lines, he argues, are still felt in our world today. It is a story of power, money, and the fragile architecture upon which modern economies are built. Joining him in conversation is Michael Schulder, former CNN producer and founder of Wavemaker Conversations, a podcast where, in his own words, curiosity meets hope. Please give a warm welcome to Liaquat Ahamed and Michael Schulder.
Liaquat, we'll start with the curiosity, and we'll hopefully end up with hope, but can't guarantee it. I want to start, I'm a journalist, and so Liaquat is both a historian, an economic historian, and I'm getting up the first paragraph of an article he wrote in Fortune magazine the other week, and I'm just going to read just the first paragraph. I won the Pulitzer Prize for History for Lords of Finance, my account of how 4 central bankers' decisions triggered the Great Depression. I have just completed 1873, a book on America's railroad boom of the 1870s, the last time private capital flooded into a transformative new infrastructure technology at a scale comparable to what we're experiencing now. That research is why, when I look at the artificial intelligence build-out today, I am genuinely frightened. So, we'll find out why you are frightened and how frightened we should be, but I want to start, we had talked we're going to come back to that. I do want to talk a little bit about, we had talked about where do we start this conversation, and I'm telling you, I read this book, every single page was captivating. I was even thinking every topic sentence is captivating. There are so many places to start. So Liaquat has agreed to let me start randomly by basically playing pick a page, any page, and that's where we're going to start the conversation. So if you don't mind.
Before you do that,
yes.
Yeah, first of all, thank you, Michael, and thank you to the wonderful organizers of this wonderful festival. I've known Mary Haft for 42 years, so it's just such a thrill to be here. So, take it away.
Has she changed over the 42 years?
No,
well,
she's
subject.
as charming as ever.
Okay, so here we go. Pick a page, any page. I mean, you saw I didn't do anything. Here we go. Oh, God. Please, God. Well, the chapter is Blind Capital, and I'll just start. With its much larger capital base, Rothschilds captured the dominant share, underwriting double the amount of Barings. The latter did, however, manage to remain a force to be reckoned with by leveraging its balance sheet, with Moore holding only 15 cents of capital for each dollar of assets, while Rothschilds very prudently maintained a capital cushion of 40 cents for each dollar of commitments. Capital cushion, less cushion. We are experiencing that right now. We've experienced it over many cycles. Where does that story begin, if we just begin it there?
Okay, this is actually a test of whether the onset of dementia is, because this book covers 3 continents, many countries, 10 years, has tens of characters, and I was a little worried that when Michael suggested this idea, that I was going to totally forget about the person that he asked. But okay, let me tell you first about the Rothschilds. They were the richest family in the world in 1873. And to give you a sort of sense of the scale of their wealth, they were worth $250 million, which if you translated it into today's terms, would make them $300 billion, which until the last 10 years would have put them in the top, in the richest family in the world still. They've been overtaken, obviously, with our friend Elon. So they were very, very wealthy. And to give you a sense of the scale, they owned 41, they had built and owned 41 stately homes across Britain and France. And you actually have seen one of these stately homes. If you've ever watched the TV series Downton Abbey, that home belonged to the Rothschilds. So you get a sense of the scale of their wealth.
And so what created that wealth was actually a very positive thing that led to a huge global boom. Explain the connection between what they did and why this was just fantastic for the global economy.
So they were essentially inventors of the international bond market. And in the years, they first made their money as smugglers during the Napoleonic Wars, helping Britain get around move gold into Europe.
Which I learned, the French blockade.
Yes.
Britain was blockaded by France. It always helps to be somebody who can help you militarily. It's a very good asset.
Absolutely. And then in the years after the Napoleonic Wars, they helped all of the countries in Europe rebuild. And, you know, the Napoleonic Wars were 25 years of war. Europe was devastated, and they helped finance all of the major countries in Europe rebuild. By 1850, they were very wealthy, and they almost went bankrupt in 1848 because of the revolutions that swept across Europe. But they were bailed out by the French government, and in the years after 1850, they turned their attention to financing the railroad boom, and a railroad boom across the world. So it wasn't just the US, it was the US, across Europe, South America, and all of the infrastructure that got built, ports, ship companies. So by 1873, they were at the pinnacle of their power.
And this whole financing of railroads, and we think about AI today and the data centers, railroads did transform our world. And if you had invested in railroad bonds back then, it could have been great, but sometimes it didn't. tell us about that and why there was maybe more risk than people imagined.
Yeah. Now, first of all, I should apologize for the headline in that first Fortune article. My two daughters read it and said, "This does not sound like you. I mean, you wouldn't brag like this." So, the substance of the article I wrote, but the headline was written by the editors at Fortune. Was designed as clickbait to get as many eyes as
that's
possible.
why I read it just now.
Right.
So tell us about the upside and the downside of investing in the railroads.
Okay, so in the 1850s and 60s and 70s, the average person did not want to invest in equities. They thought equities were way too risky. There'd been a giant bear market in the late 1840s because of the revolutions in Europe. And I'm focusing very heavily on Europe because that was the source of savings for most of the world. The US was a growing economy, but was viewed as an emerging market economy. To give you a sense of the scale, the London Stock Exchange was over $10 billion on the London Stock Exchange, whereas the New York Stock Exchange was only $2 billion, and the Paris Stock Exchange was $5 billion. So Europe was just much more significant globally.
And let me just pause there because I found this a fascinating light on America. America, you had a quote in the book about how the U.S. cannot be trusted. It's a nation of swindlers and gamblers.
Yes. But actually what made it particularly, the Rothschilds had branches across Europe, but they refused to invest in the U.S. because they'd lost a whole lot of money in the canal boom of the 1840s. And what really shocked them was that they had lent to states. And it turned out, under the US Constitution, that states had sovereign immunity. And so you couldn't sue states to recoup your, they weren't like private borrowers, they were like sovereign borrowers. And this just shocked the Rothschilds, and they thought, the cards are definitely stacked against us, so we refuse to lend to anyone in the United States.
Did that change?
You know, it did because they stopped lending to states and they started lending to railroads, but only a very modest amount. The Rothschilds were never big participants in the U.S. railroad boom. The interesting thing about the U.S. railroad boom, about $3 billion went into the U.S. railroad boom from after the Civil War till 1873. $1 billion came from Europe, but $2 billion came from local investors. And one of the villains of my book, I don't know whether you'd call him a villain, but one of the central characters was a man by the name of Jay Cook, who had helped finance the U.S. after the Civil War, during the Civil War. In fact, had raised $1.5 billion for the Union by selling bonds to individuals. And that was a totally novel exercise. He, in effect, democratized the whole raising of capital in a way that was not true in Europe. Europe, most of the investors were high net worth individuals. There were 300,000 or 400,000 high net worth individuals, whereas in the US, there were millions of people who bought bonds in very small denominations to help the Union government. And at the center of that was Jay Cook. And after the Civil War, he turned his attention to the railroads. The first transcontinental railroad was completed in 1869, and he latched on to a project to build the second railroad, transcontinental railroad, the Northern Pacific, which was going to take a northern route. That turned out to be the spark that got the crisis going.
And is it the spark that got the crisis going because we just had too many tracks?
We had too many tracks going to too many cities that had not enough people. And everyone, I mean, this is what typically happens in a boom. It was, in the first few years, we were building 4,000 miles a year, 4,000 miles a year, and railroads, it was a totally rational construction boom. Somehow, in 1870, partly because of disruptions in capital markets, capital started going in all sorts of crazy directions. And you got a lot of craziness around the world. You got, on the London Stock Exchange, countries that had never borrowed before were borrowing $300, $400, $500 million. You got France raising $1 billion. So in today's terms, that would be $1.2 trillion, which it paid to Germany after the Franco-Prussian War. And in the U.S., you had an explosion in railroad building, and you had lines going from, into areas where there was no one who lived. There were no inhabitants, and so there were truly excesses in that period.
Which is where, and again, I don't want to bring it to the present too much, but as I listen to you, you can't help wonder, okay, AI, like the railroads, is transformative. We know it's transformative. Is there too much money chasing AI infrastructure? Do you have any insights on that?
I suppose the only main insight I have is that the latter stages of the railroad bubble continued for 3 years. So people were declaring that there's too much money chasing, going into railroad bonds in 1871. It took another 2 years for the whole thing to implode. So it would be very easy to declare, the AI boom is overdone, but it could go on, we could be at the very early stages of the end of the boom, but it could continue for 2-3 more years, and we could get trillions more dollars going into AI infrastructure.
If I can just tell my wife, Nancy, if you can make a note 2028, we just need to be ready for that. Well, I mean, we're getting actionable intelligence here.
I can foresee the future.
You mentioned how 2 years, still pretty quickly, you said when this bubble burst, you said the velocity of the fall was unexpected. People sort of knew, and maybe this relates more to the stock market bust, but people knew something was going to happen, but it was the sheer velocity of it, which I guess gets back to people saying never try to time your investments.
Yeah, there's an old adage, or actually not that old, a relatively new adage in economics, which is things take much longer to happen than anyone expects. And when they happen faster. And that is the characteristic of almost all these bubbles, that bull markets last for a long time. So 5, 10, 15 years. And bear markets last for 18 months, 2 years. Things go down very sharply. And in the passage you referred to, I was describing the bubble on the Vienna stock market. Now, I don't know if you've been to Vienna, but there was a real estate boom which created every single hotel that you go to in Vienna today was built during that bubble, real estate bubble. So it transformed Vienna. And for 3 years, Vienna was, massive amounts of capital were going into Viennese real estate and also into the stock market. And then in May of 1873, just when the emperor's daughter, a 16-year-old daughter, was getting married to the Crown Prince of Bavaria, and all of the royal families of Europe were gathered in Vienna. And there were balls and there were, celebrations every night. The Viennese Stock Exchange decided that was the moment to teach everyone a lesson. And it went down the main stock index went down 40% in a single day. So you had this surreal scene of the royal families of Europe dancing to, Strauss waltzes every night. And meanwhile, during the day, the stock exchange was cratering. So that was the beginning. That was the spark that set it all off. Initially, everyone thought, okay, we've been saying that Vienna is overpriced. This is just one market. So for the next few months, nothing much happened. And then in September, Jay Cooke, who, remember, was one of the most well-connected financiers in the country. He was a friend of the president's. The president had actually stayed with him early September, and he was he was very well connected in Washington D.C. He was trying to raise capital for this Northern Pacific, and in the middle of September, he was forced to announce that he had run out of money. Now, the idea, everyone suddenly said, if Jay Cooke cannot raise the capital for a railroad, what hope is there that we will be able to raise the capital for a railroad? And so the whole thing cratered over the next few weeks. By the end of the year, a third of all railroad bonds had defaulted. Within 5 years, half the railroad bonds in the country, and remember, I said $2-3 billion had gone into railroads. So half of those stopped paying interest. So it was a massive, and this is at a time, just to give you a sense of scale, this is at a time when the GDP of the entire US was less than $10 billion. So it was much larger than 2008, for example.
And earlier you mentioned that headline, and you said, well, you're more humble than that headline, and that this whole idea of humility and hubris plays a big role in your book. I mean, he does a masterful job at weaving together systemic forces and the individuals who are either riding those systemic forces or juicing them. Jay Cooke started making so much money, I learned from your book, that the hubris was over the top. Tell us just a little bit about that. In fact, you have something, there's a quote from his memoir.
Yes, he declared at the end of the Civil War that he was God's chosen instrument. He was actually a somewhat eccentric character. He did not, he did not look like your typical Wall Streeter. He wore a big slouch hat. He had a long white beard. He looked more like an Old Testament to profit. And he read nothing but the Bible. When he went under, he was totally vilified. It actually turned out he had most of the journalists on Wall Street and in Philadelphia in his pay, and that they were writing very laudatory articles about how the Northern Pacific was going to. I think they called it the weather up there is beautiful. Someone said. Someone had a headline which said, "Jay Cook's Banana Belt," where you were going to get tropical type weather up in Minnesota. So
it's so interesting because one of the headlines in the Wall Street Journal this morning is about Elon Musk and SpaceX and how he developed this idea. And a quote from Elon Musk in the early days when he was just generating this interest in outer space travel and Mars, Musk said, "Superlatives always capture the attention." Superlatives. And it sounds like these journalists were conveying the superlatives on Jay Cook's behalf.
right.
So we as investors
Okay,
should
no,
be...
don't ask me that. So, I mean,
I wish I could figure out what you thought I was going to ask you. So listen, among the themes in your book, and we're going to get to questions in about 4 minutes or so. Among the themes, collective madness, a frenzy of gambling, contagion of fear. I mean, these are all things that, we've sort of experienced in our lives. But tell us about just how that dynamic took off, because you told us that, in Europe, at first, you mentioned, it was all the big wealthy investors, and then it became average people who were saving money and saw a chance with these bonds to just make a little more. It didn't sound like excessive greed.
yeah, I mean, people always ask me, what can we do to prevent this from happening again? And my response is, when you can find a way to repeal human nature. Because there is nothing, every one of these financial crises is different. They have certain common elements, but the scale varies, the markets vary. I mean, at the moment, the equity market is 200% of GDP. I mean, it is, in an economy of 30 trillion, the value of the US stock market is 60 trillion. We have never been in this sort of situation. Should the government be trying to regulate how much money goes into stocks? Obviously not. So I think we are condemned to relive this sort of episode and this sort of drama again and again. It won't happen. If it happens again in the next couple of years, it won't happen for another generation. But every 25 to 30 years, we are condemned to relive this drama.
Not to be political, but you're not expecting an executive order to repeal human nature?
No.
Just thought we're going to take questions. I have one joke I want to tell you about the Rothschilds, and it was from, and maybe this will ring some bells for you or spark something, but I don't know if you all know the great Yiddish author Sholem Aleichem, who wrote the stories that led to Fiddler on the Roof. And they're set in this very poor Jewish town, this shtetl, and one of the guys in that town has a great idea to make this town wealthy. He's going to go visit the Rothschilds in Paris, travels all the way, and convince one of the leaders, James,
right,
to move to this town of Kozrilivka. And he gets access to it, and James comes down, and the guy says, "We really want you to move to Kozrilivka." He said, "Why would I give all this up and move to Kozrilivka?" He said, "Because if you move to Kozrilivka, you will live forever. You'll have everlasting life." And James says, "How is that possible?" And he says, because a rich man has never died in Kozrilivka.
Great. I can't top that.
Okay. I'm sure there are a lot of questions, so take it away. I can't, yes. I think somebody's got a mic up there. Oh, you've got the mic. Okay. So there's a gentleman right there with his hands up. He's got a baseball cap.
A quote you gave stimulated this question, and you said it takes a lot longer for something to happen and that it happens really fast. I'd like to ask you about how you feel about climate change and the economic impact it will have, global warming, and particularly, I believe you're talking about some other crash, economic crash, possibly happening very soon, but global warming will probably cause migrations, unbelievable amounts of people leaving delta areas, coastal areas, other people unable to farm because the fires or the agricultural temperature is too hot, etc. Fishermen also. What do you think? What would you say about that? Thank you.
Okay. God, that's way above my pay grade. I mean, look, I believe that climate change is a problem. I think that it will cause major disruptions in the way we all live. Will it cause financial markets to crater? And I don't know about that. Will financial markets sort of anticipate what's happening, and will they sort of will it come as a surprise? I've tended to focus on the psychology of investors and what happens to that during a financial crisis. And I'm not sure what climate change does to that.
And if I can, while you have some water, just
Right.
if I can add one detail about your life. You told me the other day that when you were in investments and financial management, you managed retirement accounts, pension funds. And so you are keenly sensitive to balancing risk and reward. And so that question really does play into that. And how risk averse should one be? It's a human nature question.
Okay, God, taking me back 20 years when I was in financial markets, I was in the most boring portion of financial markets. So I was a bond manager. And I suppose it's ironic that I wrote a book about the early stages of the bond market and how it was very, very exciting. But when I was managing money, we were managing the safest assets of any pension fund. So they put a whole lot of money into equities, and then they would put money into bonds. And the big risk then, when I was involved in markets, was that we went through the inflation of the 70s and 80s, which really was terrible if you were a bond investor. I mean, I'm not sure what
Well, I just,
point
you
I
know,
was making.
you know what, it's not even a point, it's just that you're looking at a person who has the sensibility of keenly being aware of balancing risk and reward, which is what we do every day in life. I want to look for another question. Well, let's see.
Down here,
if you can,
Bob,
yeah, if you
Bob
can,
Diamond.
if you can come down, all the way down, right over here. Oh.
Okay.
Thank you. You were very clear that this is about human nature, but if you were appointed instead of Kevin Warsh to be the governor of the Fed, and you have the meeting coming up next week, what would you be thinking as the new governor?
Okay. So, okay, let me answer that in a slightly elliptical way. and there's a sort of almost a superstition in markets now. Every time a new chairman of the Fed has been appointed since 1970, the gods that govern financial markets decide to challenge them. So, in 1970, Arthur Burns is appointed governor of the Federal Reserve. In 1971, the whole Bretton Woods financial system craters, and he has to decide what to do. And then in 1979, Paul Volcker is appointed chair of the Federal Reserve, and suddenly there's a run on the dollar and a crisis which forces him to raise interest rates to 21, 22%. In 1987, Alan Greenspan is appointed chairman of the Fed, and 2 months later, the stock market falls 30% in one day. In 2006, Ben Bernanke is appointed chair of the Fed, and the gods decide to give him a year of grace before they decide to crater the subprime market, and then we get the whole 2008 crisis. The only one who to escape this curse was Janet Yellen, because nothing happened when she was appointed in 2014, I think. In 2018, Jay Powell is appointed chair of the Fed, and we get COVID within 2 years. So I would hate to be in Kevin Warsh's shoes, and I think I would. So that's sort of bigger picture. Look, I think he faces an unenviable task. He has a boss who wants him to cut, and I say boss in inverted commas, who wants him to cut interest rates. He has financial markets, which is his real boss, who want interest rates to rise. He's on record as saying that he will shrink the size of the Federal Reserve's balance sheet, and how to do that by cutting interest rates is going to be a real challenge. And then he's also on record as saying that he thinks the Federal Reserve did too many things, and that he would like to cut back on the swaps program, which is essentially the Federal Reserve acting as the lender of last resort to the rest of the world. And, I don't think the rest of the world is going to be very happy if the Federal Reserve decides to cut back on its role as lender of last resort to the whole global financial system, which is essentially a dollar-based system. So I think I would have a lot of sleepless nights if I was Kevin Warsh. Sorry, that's not a good answer.
Let's see. We've got somebody back there.
Up
Upper left.
Time for 2 more questions.
So you mentioned that you're big in the psychology of the financial crises. What are the main factors for the psychology of people in the markets to tumble? And also, what's the psychology for it to come back? What are the main factors on that level?
Okay, and I think no one quite knows what the timing of when suddenly markets turn. They go up and they reach sort of crazy levels, and figuring out what it is at that point that causes markets to suddenly say, whoops. I mean, it's a little bit like the Roadrunner cartoon. that they're running along, and then they suddenly look down and said, God, there's nothing supporting us. You know, I cannot recommend Andrew Ross Hawkins' 1929 more highly enough. That actually captures the mood of when a market goes, you know, gets too high and tumbles. So that's the first thing. The second is my story is my book is about two things. One is a boom-bust cycle, which is driven by investor psychology. But the second is by crazy monetary policy. And this was a sort of aspect that I thought had been totally neglected, which is in 1873, the world had had 50 years of stable monetary policy built on a combination of gold and silver. And in 1873, the monetary authorities of, actually, the people in charge decide to end up abandoning silver, which accounted for half the monetary, the foundation of money in the world, and just moved to gold. And that was a totally geopolitical move. That was Prussia, or Germany by then, having militarily defeated France, deciding to double down and attack France financially. And you may say that, well, that's a far-fetched story and that's not going to happen again. But let me tell you about something that happened in 2008. Hank Paulson happened to be in Beijing during the Beijing Olympics. And this was in the middle of the financial crisis. And he heard a rumor that the Russians had approached the Chinese and said, why don't we both jointly sell a giant chunk of the US agency bonds and, you know, that we own, and essentially use this opportunity to bring the US to its knees. The Chinese very wisely said no. But the key thing is in financial crises, geopolitics doesn't take a holiday. And, you know, lots of countries and nations that are not our best friends own a giant amount of US debt. So the thing that scares me is that we get a financial crisis at a time when one of our enemies decides to launch a financial attack on the US.
We have time for one more question. I actually saw that woman in the back. Whoever has the mic on that right side, yes, this will be the last question, after which you will have the opportunity to go out and buy Liaquat's books and get him to sign them. Last question.
Thank you, and thank you for this talk. Just looking at today's markets, and you're talking about the financial markets, how much will the play of crypto and private equity impact, accelerate, decelerate, implode in this next coming?
You know, I think we've actually already begun to see a sequence of imploding speculative markets. Crypto hit a high, I mean, I don't follow it that closely, but it hit a high a year ago and is, you know, beginning to, so a lot of speculation is coming out of crypto, not just Bitcoin, but all the other minor coins. Gold hit a high earlier this year, and a lot of the air is coming out of that market. So that is actually not atypical of market tops, that it goes from, one over speculative market to another. On private credit, well, private equity and private credit, credit, I think, is a problem. But it's, you've got to get the problem in the right scale. There's $2 trillion, $3 trillion in private credit. We are talking about a global equity market that is $100 trillion, a US equity market that is $60 trillion. So I think I would be very worried about just the scale of the over-speculation in equities and in public equities.
Very last question, 60 seconds, following up on that gentleman's question. In human nature, what about human nature could be a positive force to keep the growth going in this climate and possibly stave off a bust?
Well, I don't know whether to stave off a bust. I mean, I think if you use the railroad boom in the U.S. as an analogy, the railroad boom started in the, after the Civil War. We had a bust in 1873. We then had, 5 years of no railroad construction. And then we got another boom in the 1880s. And then we got a bust again. And then we got another boom in the 1890s. So, I would not declare AI or all of these innovations dead. But the financial market repercussions of these innovations, they don't occur in a straight line. And we could easily get booms and busts, a sequence of them before the whole thing is over.
So bottom line is we should follow the Stoics, be prepared for uncertainty, and accept that we have to live with it.
Wonderful bottom line.
Thank you, Liaquat.
Thank you, Michael.